What's going on, Workforce? Brian and Chris here, and today we're talking about the reaction to the Hildibrand questline Relic system that is coming here with patch 6.25. And not everything's really positive about it, so we thought we'd highlight some of the different views, kind of talk about it now that we've had the weekend to really think about the Hildibrand questline leading into the Relic system. And so just to kind of highlight it, just so that everybody can kind of see here, what we're seeing in our comments. Chris, you said you saw people streaming talking about it. Like, why don't you tell people about what you've also seen, and we'll highlight one or two of the comments here.
Some of it's just in stream titles about how people are feeling about the patch, and overwhelmingly things seem positive towards like Savage Dungeons. Island Sanctuary has remained hype, data center visit, but some of the Hildy stuff I've seen like some, oh, is that really what we want? Lots of like dots with that, which, you know, the goal of the streams to kind of invite people in for that discussion. So that may not even necessarily be how that streamer feels, but when I went and hung out in those streams, there are people in those chats that are disappointed in this. And so it lines up with our feed here. If you just kind of search our comments for Hildy, then you end up with a mix. And there are people that say they're disappointed to see content that was historically not required become required. People who have skipped it over the years feel kind of like, wow, so I have to go back and do all this old stuff, which is a similar sentiment to when we like added Crystal Tower raids to being mandatory. Anytime something shifts to being mandatory. And then there are people who said, hey, this is really delightful, and there is battle content locked behind it that maybe people haven't done. So what a neat chance to go back and kind of reflect on that. And so if the goal at the front of this video is to just kind of get ahead of anybody who, you know, already wants to kind of have like a base conclusion, because we get a handful of those comments from time to time. I would say the last one is that this is a big ask, and there are a couple people in here that says, like the one down there, Garrett, that says, I have a lot to do. I will say that Aorzi and Archives, if you're not following them, they stream over on YouTube. They did Hildy, my understanding is they did Hildy start to finish with reading all the cutscenes and discussing with chat, start to finish 6 hours. And so when you're talking about needing to skip it and get straight to the battle content and all that, it should be something substantially less than that. And so right out of the gate, I would say like this is lengthier than most quest lines, but like it's not that we've never had a relic with a story attached to it.
Well, you know, when it comes down to it, the nice thing, because you're right in terms of the commitment of time, is you're not looking at, you know, like, oh, I have to get all the way through Endwalker to do the relic, which that's also a step, but you've probably already done that, and that's something kind of the main content side of it. If you skip, let's say you're like just like, you know, skipping the Hildy's cutscenes at all, I don't think it's going to take like much time whatsoever, especially now you have flying in ARR. Like when all of a sudden you have all these low quality of lives that have come through, I think getting caught up to Hildy is going to be something that isn't as big of a time commitment. I do want to highlight like the Lordy just like briefly, and then I also want to talk about these comments to kind of highlight some contrary thoughts to like generally how I feel. I'm not 100% positive on it. I'm not negative on it, because it's just like I'm going to see how it comes together, because one of the driving factors, I know people really love the comedy, and I've always enjoyed that, but it was always the battle content that got me into doing that in the past. But the Lordy says here, the main issue really for me is forcing people to do the side content that maybe they wouldn't necessarily do. Myself, I'm caught up on Hildibrand. However, definitely once I got to the Shadowbringers quests, the gags were really losing their appeal. And so that's just the general summary of them. You already highlighted Garrett talking about, you know, like for someone who hasn't done Hildy, how much do they have to do? That seems like some people might feel like they got a lot. And the nice thing is right now in this full context, like you got 2 months pretty much until the expansion and until the patch drops. But then you actually have so like 2 months even before 6.2 and then 6.25. Like you still have plenty of time right now to get that knocked out. So I'm not feeling pressured to get caught up. I haven't done the Shadowbring, the Stormblood ones yet. So I'm just like, okay, or the Shadowbringers.
If you'd done none of them, it would be 1 to 2 hours a week.
Yeah.
And you'd be done in, you know, 3 or 4 weeks, and you've got 4 months. So you only need to find one of those sessions every month. You got a long time.
Now, Orc here says, I'm actually a little disappointed that the relics are locked behind Hildy himself. For me, the comedy of that quest line was something that I needed to do to get in the mood to enjoy it all, and I am unfortunately rarely in the mood for it. So I have not done any of it beyond the first ARR arc, which would mean a lot of forced catching up to begin with this relic in this expansion. I would rather not have to force myself, force my way through this an otherwise beloved storyline and likely end up hating it because that all I've done while doing it was not in the mood for it. And so that's something that's kind of an interesting perspective because, you know, like at the end of the day, this is like when we talk about skipping stories, Hildy is a beloved story. A lot of people really love the story, the comedy and the character and how it kind of all plays out and its silliness. Like if you start to think about it, especially in terms of sometimes the themes of what we've been doing in game, you know, some of the characters, some of the stories, like sometimes that levity ends up being something that's just kind of a nice place to kind of live through. Would you have, what are your thoughts, Chris?
I mean, I would say if you're worried about rushing it, we're saying 4 months until you want to be there on day one, but the relic is exceedingly optional content. And the first step of the relic is usually that kind of just like the P1S, right? It's meant to be that invitation. And so the first step of the relic is usually like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you made it here. Here's your relic. Like it's not ever like a huge ask as far as I remember. It's never that big of a deal, which means you really have 8 months because you have another 4 months until the first true step, assuming this follows the traditional relic kind of first step being an easy one. And them saying this quest centric, I feel that if it was okay, now run a Hildy trial 6,700 times, like that would be really out of line with what the slide said. The slide said quest centric, so I assume that out of the gate it's going to be just another Hildy quest line. So that's my impression of it. So I think we're kind of getting alarmed about something that is easily 6 to 8 months out. Not saying it won't become a problem, but like you, I would rather not hold my breath for 8 months. I would rather not let this linger over my head, especially when we have a lot of great things that we know we're going to like. I'm really excited about Savage Dungeons. And so I'd rather just kind of wait. And then if this becomes a problem, if it's like, oh my gosh, for some reason this relic's actually better and Savage players need it and they're all rushing through Hildy and, you know, like if there's something there, but I think most of this should just be fine.
Yeah. What's interesting about this and this moment is that, like, I would say, I remember the relic being heavily quest centric in terms of ARR. And then essentially as we got into Stormblood and Shadowbringers, that's where we saw the invitation in Eureka and the invitation into Zadnor Boja, which doesn't necessarily work also for everybody. So at some point along the way, like there's a relic process that has worked better for you than in most. For whatever reason, like Zadnor was the first relic that I ever fully finished. I'd started all of them, and then somewhere along the way, I was just like, meh, like I'm just not that into this at this moment. And they've all done unique and interesting ways of taking existing content and adding it in as an offering, where I would say Boja and Zadnor, Zadnor and Eureka have gone a little bit further away, where I would say the best implementation we've had so far has been the Boja Zadnor, because it also offered other methods in which that you could progress, but they were still like, oh, you still have to do this at this point if you want to continue on. And this essentially, I think, is kind of bringing it back to that, like that original kind of maybe vision of looking at the content that the game offers, and then essentially like, okay, yes, it is going to be Hildy. There's going to be a story here. I think that does mean, and to speculate a little bit, that we'll see Gilgamesh make a return, because that's a kind of big theme as a part of that storyline. And I think that could be a real key into what we're about to step into. And I think essentially then all of a sudden, now you're talking about kind of the multiverse, maybe it means that we'll be able to do more stuff on all the different shards, and we're looking for these, these items that are then going to be crafted with the goldsmith and the weaponsmith. That I honestly, personally, I'm definitely more positive than I am negative. But like there could have been a much worse implementation. Like when people, like if people are upset about Hildy, like imagine if they're like, and now go do 1,000 PvP matches. You know, like for me, that's one of the things I actually really enjoy about, especially Destiny. But hands down, every week, whenever I put out my Destiny guides, people are like, hey, do you still have to do like PvP for some of these questline weapons and stuff? Like where it will take you into PvE, then you have to go into PvP. And if you don't like PvP. I'm not judging you, but imagine if all of a sudden they in 14 said, yeah, after 1,000 crystalline conflicts, you'll get this, this rare item that will allow you to do that. And I think that would probably have had a bigger level of like, wait, what? I mean, the PvP crowd would probably be thrilled, but
I mean, on that PvP note, if this does end up pushing people into a type of content they don't like, either A, it could come with a change, right? Crystalline Conflict opened PvP up to a lot more people. So if you back up 5 years and make that statement, it's a lot more offensive than today. Today, there might be people that go, Brian, that doesn't sound that bad. Yeah. And those might be people who didn't like PvP until Crystalline Conflict. So A, it could turn the content on its head, but B, we regularly have conversations where it seems like, if this content is meant for anyone, should it be meant for everyone? And so when we look at relics, maybe this is something that we've seen this with things like Ultimates, where it turns people to something from before. I just did my first Anima relic all the way through. And I did it with story, and I really enjoyed it in 2022. I had a blast. And so like, if this doesn't land, let's just assume that. I think it'll be fine. But if it doesn't land, maybe instead that does reflect people back into, with Data Center Visit, Eureka and Baja already had Discords that were organizing this stuff so that people could do DRS and BA and all that. But you could be looking at even bigger groups now that it's all of NA, all of EU, all of JP. Oceanic was already, they don't need Data Center Visit, so congratulations. And so like, I think that you have a chance here where maybe this reflects back. Maybe people hard reject this relic, and like, in my mind, that's the fringe case, and instead they look backwards. I mean, I would love to see people go back and do ARR relic, because that's the one that I want to do and haven't done, because that's a huge grind, because that's the books one, right? And that's just books on books on books. And so you like every fate has a chance of dropping one sentence, and then you put together paragraphs, and those become books, and you build encyclopedia, and then you have to build a library. It's something like that. But it's a lot. It's a lot of steps. You have to build like chapters to this relic. And I remember watching my friends and like my brothers go through it back in ARR, and they're like, "Chris, you ever gonna do this?" No.
Why would I?
Why would I do that?
The hardest thing for me with relics overall, though, is that they are just a long grind for best in slot and then glamour. Like it has a window for best in slot, and then that window gets replaced with, okay, thank you for that. Now it's just a glamour piece of items. And that's where I just wish that, like, the grand scheme of 14, like the change that I would enjoy to make is that I wish the relic weapons would be able to be leveled up in that regards. Like you could, if you got one, you could actually continue to empower it rather than it become a glamour piece. And it would be really cool to see, like, if relics offered something other than,
they're just always one patch behind. Like, you do a step, you could always bring them up to one patch behind. So they would always be good for dungeons, normal raids, trials. They're not going to take you into the current Savage or Extreme, but they'll take you into like the previous Extreme or Savage. That way, like, the people that want to chase gear gets chase gear, but the people that like casually, it's like,
imagine if like that your relic for ARR, like, it was like, oh, when I have this equipped, I don't know, like something that's benign, that's not gonna break the battle content. Or imagine, if you will, like, there's this Criterion dungeon system coming out that, like, and this is pure speculative, obviously off of the dungeons themselves, but like we saw in Bosha's Adnor, you had like 2 abilities that you got, right? Like, how insane would it be to say, like, hey, we've got these like relics, right? What if that they could actually have some level of impact that's different in these style of contents? Then you could actually go and try to farm those and have a value to it. Now, obviously, when anything that would be entering into competitive sphere would be like, you wouldn't want to see that. But I'm just saying, like, okay, the deep dungeon. Okay, if you have a relic, guess what? Like, one of your abilities is going to be this, or like where you get a little bit more, where it's not affecting the end game raid, but then all of a sudden you're like, oh man, like, you have these weapons that you can farm, and then there's content that will take that bends the rules around how gear works in this game, and thus you kind of have that, and the only reason I bring that up is that this is, again, me as a Final Fantasy 11 player, like, farming your relic, like that was valuable forever. Like, and being that they had perks that were actually applied to the relic, but they couldn't go and bring perks into this game on gear. Otherwise, it would completely like. I mean, you're talking about like an insane amount of work that I wouldn't wish on anybody. But then all of a sudden, now we start talking about side content that could theoretically take advantage of it. I think that would be something very exciting. That would be what would motivate me to go and finish the various relics, because then, you know, like, oh yeah, I want to use this in this piece of content. Or if I use this, it completely changes how I play. But that's the only thing I could think of outside of glamour, and I speak to that because I'm not a glamour guy. People always ask me like, oh, your glamour looks so cool. I'm like, it is whatever was you know, put on me. And then I have occasional little things that I've kind of messed around with, but it is not my end game. And so I'm like, all right, well, it is what it is.
I think a lot of the frustration comes from people that feel forced. So, you know, I think that for me, the biggest thing that says it's not that bad is you've got 4 to 8 months to do this. And that doesn't make it less forced, but we push through a lot of things we don't like in an MMORPG to get to something you do, right? Maybe you're grinding for a particular mount. The relic itself is a grind. Like, the relic itself is not about every single moment being your favorite moment in 14. It's about these big payoff moments. And those are earned, right? So you're putting in the hard work, and those are earned. And there are times that you're like, okay, I'm going to just do one more fate. And then you do that fate, and not because it's your fate. Not like, oh my gosh, just please let me do one more fate. But because you're like, no, because I'm one away from the next step. And so like, there are these big moments, and it's about that payoff. And so worst case, that's what you're viewing the Hildibrand questline as. And of all the things to be forced, something that is trying to make it funny, something that is trying to be light, and has battle content that, if those people have never done it, it has battle content they've never done. So you talk about a game that has dropped from 3 dungeons to 2 dungeons to 1 dungeon. You talk about a game that feels like, when's the next trial again? Oh my gosh, I wish they had more than 4 Savage fights for tier, because I really enjoy them and I just want more of them. You have like other battle content you've never done. So even for people that are like, you know what, just to screw them, I'm going to hit escape through the story, I think you're missing out on some stuff in there, but you've got battle content on the other side of this. So of all the things for them to go back and leverage, this is a lot better, in my opinion, than them doing something like, now you have to clear all the side quests in ARR. You know, like there's other things they could do that would take 4 to 6 hours of blasting through. And this is 6 hours of I'm just using Eorzeans because I haven't done it yet. I'm going to go back and play through it all now to have it fresh anyway.
Yeah.
I really started it and haven't caught up, so I'm not caught up currently. But yeah, I'm just going to play it straight through. It's a new game plus.
Yeah, I hope you enjoy it. I hope and there's some points here that I could definitely see where, like, if you felt like if you needed a special mood, right? Like, it's like if I go to a movie and I'm like, okay, like, well, am I in the mood to see a comedy, or like, what am I like? Because at some point you might be like, I'm not having a good time because you know, like, you know, so like feeling that force. The good thing is that we do have lots of time. I think will still come up again whenever somebody comes into the game and the relic's already out and they're like, oh, I'm trying to get caught up, I just finished Endwalker, I'm having so many emotions, and then we're like, hey, go back and do this comedy thing if you want to be able to get this weapon. Maybe that'll be good, maybe that'll be bad. We'll obviously have to wait and see what the reaction is as we learn more, because in reality, like, being quest centric, like, it's still like, what does that ultimately mean? Like, what kind of content are we going to see? How is that going to feel? And we'll just have to we'll just have to wait and see. So if you guys are frustrated, just you know, I wouldn't get too mad about this. At the end of the day, like, you know, if when it comes out, try it, and then make sure you send your feedback. I think one of the things that we've seen how the relics have changed each and every time is based off of feedback. So they're trying to find that perfect balance within it. So Chris, what's your final thought?
Overall, guys, I understand people are feeling differently about it, so I respect other people's opinions, and hopefully everybody else can do the same. I know our comment section has had varying degrees of that, and I appreciate when people have been able to discuss it respectfully. And I want to talk about the patch notes, because there's actually battle changes in there.
All right, so let's get that done. So guys, be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll hopefully see you in our next video. But until then,
take care.